Democratic Congresswoman Jane Harman, and MSNBC contributor and columnist Charlie Sykes. Susan, I'll get to these individual leaders in just a second, but if I can ask you big picture, what are the stakes of this ceasefire holding right now?
Well, that's right. I mean, I think you saw President Trump's very overheated outburst this morning, dropping the F-bomb on live TV. Why did he do that? He clearly understands that the stakes are enormous for his credibility, not only in the region, but as he heads to a crucial summit meeting with all of the U.S.'s NATO allies in Europe. This is a moment where Trump's decisions are being tested also and questioned unusually by many within his own MAGA political coalition. So I feel like, the frayed nerves are representation of how very high the stakes are right now. So that's number one. Number two, of course, is beware the initial overheated claims. Some of what we're hearing right now from Trump's defenders is, really remarkable, considering we actually don't really know yet the results of these strikes. And they could lead to, let's hope they do, lead to a better outcome, an outcome with Iran no longer meaningfully able to pursue its nuclear program. But it could also lead to Iran doubling down on its nuclear program. So I just feel like the stakes are enormous, but the results are not yet clear.
Yeah, Congresswoman, let me start with Benjamin Netanyahu. He's been a constant presence in Israeli politics since the 90s. And I think certainly when you were on the Intel Committee and Homeland Security Intel Committee, he was around. So what are you watching for from him and how he'll impact the future of the region?
Well, he's an amazing survivor. Some claim that this invasion timing of Iran was his way to avoid a no confidence vote. And I think that may be true. He was going to face an election soon, which some thought he would lose. Now nationalism is rising in Israel and people are congratulating him. But this is very fragile. Susan is right. And I'm on the more pessimistic side. Negotiating is fine. President Trump, however, this morning used the F-bomb, and negotiating is not a four-letter word. In order to have this come out in a way that satisfies both sides and the U.S. so that the fighting stays stopped is going to be very tricky because objectives are different. The Iranians don't want to give up their nuclear capability. They have the know-how. I think they still have a lot of the materials. And conversely, that's Israel's bottom line demand and Trump's. So how do you get to half of that or 2/3 of that? So I'm watching carefully, but I don't think yet that the answer is clear. And I think that Bibi Netanyahu dodged a bullet, but there may be more bullets, not literally, but maybe even, I hope not, in his future, because if he doesn't pull this off, and if allegedly he's shooting people in Gaza and all these other problems are still there and the hostages don't come home, the remaining ones who are alive, it's a huge problem.
Susan, let's talk about another unclear answer. Okay, so we know that in Iran, the Ayatollah, who is 86, has gone into hiding with his family. The regime change question is being argued. For some, it's a question of whether he's taken out by political forces or assassination. Reports are he's had a 3-man committee working on his potential replacement. What are the chances that he survives this conflict? And if he does not, that something better would be put in his place?
Well, first of all, look, when you have an 86-year-old leader and a very a very opaque regime inside Iran, the answer is that we don't know an awful lot. But remember that the outcome here is not just either the status quo or some kind of liberal democracy that materializes. And unfortunately, the story of the last few decades in world politics is that many times the turnover in power leads to a potentially an even worse outcome, not only chaos and instability being a possibility when a government that has essentially run around since 1979, if that were to fall, it's very possible that the people with the money and guns to be blunt, in that society may acquire more power. In the short term, I think there are reliable reports. You look at the some of the commentary from my friend, the excellent Kareem Sajapur from the Carnegie Endowment, and he has pointed out, I think very correctly, that in the short term, the voices of the people who were urging negotiations with Donald Trump and with the West are undercut by this war that Netanyahu has launched and Trump's decision to join in on it. So in the short term, at least, it's very likely to me that the moderates may be undercut inside the Iranian government circles, and that the hardliners, at least for now, might emerge with somewhat more power. But again, that's part of what makes engaging in a war so very unpredictable. We don't know right now if it's a great triumph or not.
Yeah, and Congresswoman, let me go back to something Susan said earlier, which is the final battle damage assessment is still not finished. We don't know what Iran's capabilities are. How much of the outcome of all of this do you think may ultimately be, if not decided, heavily influenced by that intelligence and how it informs all three leaders and I guess potentially impacts them politically?
Well, let's start with the fact that obliterated, which was the word that the Secretary of Defense and President Trump used, is not a military term. And for sure, everything was not obliterated. The Iranians continue to possess the know-how. And there are reports that private commercial satellites took pictures of what seemed to be allegedly some of the material taken out of Fordo 3 days ahead, and then some mud put in the entrance to Fordo. So this was telegraphed in obvious ways, and the Iranians are smart cookies, and they prepared. But in addition to that, there may be other facilities that we don't know about. There's certainly, it's not just highly enriched uranium that we care about. We also care about the machinery to make bombs. That could be somewhere else. It also could be gettable from rogue states like North Korea. North Korea is teaching Iran that if you have nukes, you survive. Let's remember, Ukraine gave up its nukes in 1994 in exchange for a promise from the Russians and others to respect its sovereignty. And look where it is. So I think we have to assume that it ain't over till it's over, and it probably ain't over in terms of Iran possessing the capability to break out a nuclear bomb.
And Charlie, of course, the third leader, but arguably the most influential in all this, President Trump. His involvement in Iran comes in direct opposition to his long-stated America First agenda and, of course, what he campaigned on.
And I was the only president in decades who didn't start a war. Instead, I got us out of wars and endless wars. I will put America first every single time, every single day. You don't want to have wars. I ended wars. I call it America first. This is the policy that built this country, and this is the policy that will save our country. They said, he will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars.
His supporters will argue that that's exactly what he just did, was stop a war. Is America First dead? Is MAGA reimagined? How do you see all this?
Well, MAGA is Donald Trump, and I think we're seeing that playing out in real time, that, in fact, they are, lining up behind him. But, Donald Trump, has been railing against these endless wars for decades. What he's hoping for is this is one and done, right? You could see that with the tension and the stress this morning when he's dropping the F-bombs. But the problem with the Middle East is that none of these problems are easily solved, and the discussion has been excellent so far. We are still in a very, very, we are in early days. The outcome is unpredictable. The instability in the Middle East, I think, has been accelerated. And the question is, does Donald Trump actually understand or know what he has unleashed? I think there's a tendency sometimes to see these things in terms of news cycles. We're on day 3. Many of the players in the Middle East will look at this in terms of decades. They will take the long term, and what will happen with Iran, and how many other countries are watching this and realizing, This is the reason why we need to have nuclear weapons. This is the reason why we cannot be vulnerable anymore. So I'm looking at this in terms of the long-term nuclear proliferation, because anyone who thinks that Donald Trump has just simply been the executive producer of a 48-hour Trump show in the Middle East, I think is incredibly naive.
I think it was one of your colleagues, Susan, at The New Yorker, who recently wrote about Donald Trump and his patience. He's not been known for it. All you have to do is look back to his campaign once again, where he said he was going to solve all these problems in 24 hours, or maybe even before he took office. He's come up against the reality of how complex the world really is. But how much does patience play into this, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, Charlie is absolutely right to spotlight this as sort of a contest between the kind of, 24-hour news cycle version of producing the presidency, which is often how Donald Trump looks at it, and the actual long-term challenges that any president, Democrat or Republican, would face. I mean, we're talking about literally a generation of American presidents. All of America's Cold War presidents, from Bill Clinton on, have been absolutely obsessed with this question of Iran and its possibility to build a nuclear weapon. This is an issue that was keeping Bill Clinton up at night, George W. Bush. Barack Obama, of course, negotiated the nuclear deal that Donald Trump withdrew from. And this, I think, is a great answer to your question. Back in 2018, Donald Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, although our own intelligence estimates did not find that Iran was not in compliance with it. In fact, Donald Trump's own defense secretary and secretary of state at the time argued for the United States to stay into that nuclear deal. You could say that while Donald Trump might have impulsively decided to join in this Israeli campaign after Netanyahu launched it a couple weeks ago, that in reality, some version of this conflict was made inevitable by the decision that Donald Trump took back in 2018. And I just think that's a great example of, I look at a lot of the coverage today and it's hysterical. It is literally breathless, without any context, without any history. Donald Trump already has a long history of dealing with this issue. And I think that it's his own actions that in many ways that were a precursor to the inevitability of the strike that we are seeing